All right, part two. You're going to learn so much in the course of this reading. And I don't know about you, but I get this haunting feeling when I revisit these things that I remember from my adolescence, and then I see all of these layers, this clusterfuck of like Zionism and FBI and CIA and drugs and cults and the British in the background pulling strings, and you can anatomize so much about, I think, with a good deal of accuracy. Once you've become even a bit familiar with this information, you're much more able to understand what's happening in the present day. So without too much commentary, let's jump in. We're in part two. We're talking about Jim Jones and the People's Temple. And we're getting into how Jim Jones was selected. So, why Jimmy Jones? After his initial vetting through the Zionist lobby, Jimmy Jones was put in touch with his key patron controller during this early period in Indiana, Barton Hunter, who was at the time executive secretary of the Church in Society of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and is currently executive director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, FOR. FOR was founded in 1915 on the explicit model of the year-old British Fellowship and in collaboration with Jane Addams, who brought the British Settlement House movement from Oxford University to the US and founded the pacifist networks affiliated with the American Friends Service Committee at the time. Among radical, quote unquote, because they're really imperialist assets, right? Hence the quotes. Among radical institutions that members of FOR were responsible for founding were the National Civil Liberties Bureau, now the ACLU, the National Conference of Christians and Jews, the Committee on Racial Equality, CORE, remember that, the American Committee on Africa, FOR founder and ordained Presbyterian minister A.J. Most also created Brookwood Labor College, both as a working man's version of the Rhodes Scholarship and to funnel such Balliol College Oxford-trained British intelligence agents as James Burnham, currently a, quote, free enterprise conservative with National Review, if you've read that, into the Comintern. In addition to Barton Hunter, several members of the Butler School of Religion, where Jimmy Jones was trained, play prominent roles in FOR. Minneapolis is the Vatican of the approximately million-member Disciples of Christ, a schism from the Presbyterian Church ostensibly organized to provide a more democratic forum in reaction to the Calvinist conception of predestination. As one local theological authority put it, in Indianapolis, the establishment is the Disciples of Christ, unquote. Its leadership ranges from a conservative wing centered on executives of the Eli Lilly Corporation, Eli Lilly again, and endowment, to an ultra-liberal wing centered on such figures as Barton Hunter. But the shared worldview of both wings of the Disciple of Christ is classical British liberalism, whether it takes the form of the free enterprise ideology sponsored by the Lilly Endowment via the Heritage Foundation and other subsidiaries of Britain's Mont Pelerin Society, or that of the welfare state epitomized by AFSC programs. The Lilly Endowment, which is a heavy financial source of the Disciples of Christ, was founded in 1937 by the Lilly family, whose principal source of wealth is the Lilly Chemical and Pharmaceutical Corporation. The corporation is now the sole U.S. source of methadone, an addictive drug first developed to control concentration camp victims in Nazi Germany. Dolphine? And now as a surrogate for British-style heroin maintenance programs. Despite its conservative image, Lilly finances both left and right sides of the British intelligence operations, including both the American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation, and Freedom House, and the Maoist National Committee on United States-China Relations, Incorporated, Counterspies, Youth Project, Front, etc. So I genuinely, at this point, I absolutely just pity people who continue to see the world through this left-right, this synthetic left-right, through these synthetic, false, deceptive lenses. Because, I mean, it's so diabolically clever. What's really going on is imperialism. And imperialism funds, drives, supplies both the right and the left with their heroes and their villains, manipulates the people, gets them squabbling over completely irrelevant ideological issues, and rolls forward adeptly tugging at both the right and the left. And it's reached a point where I can barely handle going through my Facebook feed because people just don't get it. They still don't. It's very depressing, but hey, that's why I have this channel and my little niche. In a recent interview, Barton Hunter described why he had selected Jim Jones for special grooming. He's a real bright guy, as you probably can guess, said Hunter. An attractive person. Both he and his wife were very sensitive, very aggressive. Even at the point, his obvious takeover qualities were there. Even at this point, his obvious takeover qualities were there. Emphasis added. He was the pastor in the church, and it was his church. There was no resistance to this on the part of the people who came, people who were hungry, people who were lonely, people who are unseen and don't know where they're going. And here was a guy who said, this is the way. And that's how you catch people, right? That's how you catch them. Because people refuse to think for themselves, because they imagine in their fantasy world that there are some people who are somehow born into a better position to view the vast existential questions that we all face, and which in reality no single person is in any better position than anybody else to understand these things or to propound on these things. People refuse to think for themselves, and they're comforted by what's offered up to them. In short, Jimmy Jones displayed the persona of the charismatic leader whose qualities were the subject of so many studies by foundations like the Lilly Endowment at the time. Under Barton Hunter's patronage, Jim Jones was sent to the Butler University of Religion, the theological seminary of the Disciples of Christ, funded by Lilly, two of whose board members, Burton E. Beck and Eugene N. Beasley, are also trustees of the college. It was also with the backing of Hunter and Rabbi Davis that Jones was selected in 1961 to serve for a few brief months as director of the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights. Some sources indicate that Jones was removed because he was too aggressive in pursuing racial integration. However, others have suggested that a scandal was on the verge of erupting over the various low-income housing projects that Jones and Rabbi Davis were involved with, including the transfer of church members' homes to Jones's personal ownership. Immediately after his resignation, Jones took off on a 2-year trek, 61-63, to Hawaii, the Belo Horizonte Valley, the Belo Horizonte Valley in Brazil, and then back to Indianapolis after a brief stopover in Guyana, the future base of his People's Temple. Jones' stay in Brazil, where he ostensibly founded an orphanage, which collapsed as soon as he left, immediately preceded a military coup d'etat there in which various US and British intelligence agencies have been implicated. It also coincided with the deployment of members of Aldous Huxley's MK Ultra team to Brazil and other Latin American countries to study, among other things, the use of hallucinogenic drugs by the Aztecs as part of their human sacrifice rituals. And all of this seems quite quixotic, if you were aware of this at the time, but you see now how these things acquire a very fine practical point when it comes to the agenda of the prevailing ruling elite. On his return, Jones was ordained as a minister of the Disciples of Christ, and his People's Temple was accepted as an affiliated church. It was also on his return that Jones first began to claim that he was a faith healer. The Redwood Valley years. Jones' alleged fear of thermonuclear holocaust, which led him on his first trip and which ultimately led him to move 100 of his followers to Ukiah, California in 1965. I've been there many times. Was instilled by Barton Hunter and the pacifist organizations with which he was affiliated, notably the FOR. In 1961, the FOR launched a program to build real shelters for homeless people, quote unquote. Ukiah, a secluded town in the Redwood Valley that had been the scene of earlier Huxley experiments in cultism, and had been identified in a 1961 Esquire magazine article as one of the 9 safest places in the world in the event of a thermonuclear attack, provided the shelter site. Along with Jones's People's Temple, the tiny town of Ukiah was also the gathering point for members of the quote-unquote the Diggers, a San Francisco Berkeley base. I grew up in Berkeley, so I was not aware of a lot of this consciously, but I'm shaking my head and reacting because the vibe of my reaction to this article is stimulating things I might have picked up on at the time growing up in that area, in that milieu. Berkeley-based beggar cult that was a direct outgrowth of the MK Ultra clinics and for the West Coast branch of the War Resisters League, a British Fabian Society creation closely affiliated with both Bertrand Russell and with Jones's mother institution, the FOR. It was from the Diggers' communes of ravaged LSD victims and like-minded circles of the War Resisters League that many of the early California recruits into the People's Temple were drawn and molded into a cohesive cult of zombies in the secluded shelter, controlled environment of Redwood Valley. We used to call them acid casualties. You would see them, sometimes early in the morning on Saturday, you go for a walk on Telegraph Avenue and somebody would just be ranting in the middle of the street like some Old Testament prophet, and you would just look at them and go, acid casualty. Dropped too much. During the early months in Ukiah, Hunter made regular trips from Indianapolis to maintain close watch on the developing People's Temple operation. A new controller, however, had already been deployed into the group who would supplant Hunter's day-to-day controller role until Jones's deployment into Guyana. This was Tom Stone, reported to be an ex-CIA agent and the assistant attorney for Mendocino County during the Jones cult's tenure there. Through the Stone connection, Jones was appointed to the Mendocino County Juvenile Commission, which provided a cover for recruiting approximately 50 youthful drug runners aged 12 to 16. God, this is vile. This is vile. For Jones's soon-to-be established narcotics network under the guise of rehabilitating them from drug abuse. The gall, it comes very naturally if you understand the British Empire's strategies in China and all over the world, like telling the Emperor of China, who, we don't like this attitude of yours in rejecting the drugs that we're selling. How dare you raise any objection to it? It was Tim Stone's later defection to form the Concerned Parents Group modeled on Rabbi Davis's CERF, CERF, that reportedly triggered Jones's first threat of instant suicide by 300 of his followers. It was at the time that Stone joined the temple that the first public reports began to circulate of the cult's widespread use of drugs, electroshock, sodomic rape. Sodomic? I've never seen that word. And other bizarre practices. Of course, it's MK Ultra. These techniques are well known. And other bizarre practices in the recruitment and discipline of members. However, when two investigative reporters, Marshall Kilduff and Lester Gonsalving, both with the San Francisco Inquirer, attempted to follow the leads provided by a respected local Ukiah Baptist minister, Richard Taylor, they were summarily fired. All right, we're getting into how the brainwashing works. And as we read this, we can look at how these street-level dirty tactics have been elevated and refined, and we see them pervasive through Western society today. The heavy introduction of drugs and perverted sexual practices to break down the individual cult member's sense of identity was a direct byproduct of Jones's integration into two sub-projects of MK Ultra, the Glide Memorial Church and Project One, which were based in San Francisco, where Jones and his advisor, Stone, traveled to recruit new cult members. Though already a practicing bisexual, Jones was bent further in that direction by a project sponsored by the Kinsey Institute, whose main offices are at the University of Indiana's Bloomington campus that Jones attended earlier, and run out of Glide Memorial. Dr. Kinsey, who founded the Institute, was a close collaborator of Aldous Huxley. Under the nominal direction of Reverend Cecil Williams, described by sources as a less charismatic variant of Jones, Glide was a nexus point for the New Left and counterculture established by Huxley and Margaret Mead's former husband, Gregory Bateson. Look him up. Joining elements of gay rights, women's liberation, and so on, with support networks for such terrorist gangs as the Symbionese Liberation Army, Symbionese Liberation Army. Actual control over Cecil Williams was exercised by Ted McIlvenna, who controlled Kinsey Institute funding of projects both at Glide and the People's Temple. One of the projects at Glide that the Kinsey Institute sponsored and that Jones is known to have participated in was the National Sex and Drug Forum, whose report released 2 years ago concluded that everyone, this is 1978, that everyone was a homosexual. Another Glide-based program was the Council on Religion and Homosexuality, although never himself known to have been associated with the Kinsey Institute projects at Glide personally. The gay networks created at Glide are known to have supported the electoral campaign of Harvey Milk, who was recently murdered in the aftermath of the People's Temple mass suicides. Little is as yet known of early drug use, an essential aspect of the brainwashing control of most cults by members of the People's Temple, although Jones's association with various projects financed by the Eli Lilly Endowment, a fortune built by one of the country's largest drug manufacturers, is certainly suggestive. The first documented evidence of the cult's involvement with drugs is found via Jones's association with Project One, a heavily funded behavior modification factory run by Dr. Joel Fort and former Air Force intelligence operative Captain H. Bruce Franklin in the heart of San Francisco's hippie Fillmore district. Fort was a leading member of Huxley's MKUltra team to produce the rock drug counterculture. Drawing on his early experiments at Lexington Hospital, Fort co-authored Utopiates, a book on LSD 25 that was published by the Tavistock Institute in London, where much of the early planning for MKUltra took place. Project One was funded in part by the Transamerica Corporation, which owns United Artists Studios and includes as its corporate vice president William Jones, a member of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. So going right up, connecting right up to the top. Inside Project One, a large converted warehouse, Fort ran a drug clinic. Methadone supplied by Eli Lilly, a paramilitary training center, a behavior modification clinic, a computer that maintained psychological profiles of local politicians, counterculture freaks, potential terrorists, etc., and an opportunity high school. An estimated 75% of the students at the high school where Jones taught were recruited into his People's Temple. An equal percentage of those recruited traveled with Jones to Guyana in 1977. Glide Memorial and Project One were each chosen by the SLA to carry out its free food distribution program. Their connection to the SLA went much deeper. Captain H. Bruce Franklin, who worked with Fort at Project One, was also a close associate of Rand Corporation research director Daniel Ellsberg, and MIT linguistics brainwasher Noam Chomsky, boo, who is now openly allied with Black Rose. Heard of that? Anarchist terrorist networks in Canada. Who covered for the JFK assassination by defending the Warren Report, who ridiculed people who questioned the official 9/11 narrative, the ridiculous 9/11 narrative, and who defended the Federal Reserve. Do we need to say any more? How can people be so stupid? Franklin was a founder of such Bay Area terrorist groups as the SLA, the Venceremos Brigade, and the Maoist Revolutionary Union, now the Revolutionary Communist Party. As a controlling figure in the Haight-Ashbury Glide Memorial Church, which served as a deployment point for the entire array of drug cults in the area, Franklin was instrumental in building up Jones as a frequent guest speaker and leading figure in the ghetto and LSD culture. In 1971, the entirety of the People's Temple followers were moved from Ukiah to San Francisco in a parallel to the current, more openly replay of the ISIS myth. The cult of ISIS goes also all the way to the top of the British monarchy. A more violent replay of the ISIS myth of cult members moving from the countryside to destroy the cities. Appropriately, the site purchased for the new temple was formerly known as the Albert Pike Memorial Temple in commemoration of General Albert Pike, founder of the Ku Klux Klan, together with Judah Benjamin, both operatives working for British Freemasonry on behalf of the Confederate South. The empire depends on slavery. What more can I say? What more can we, why do we need to understand? And Dr. Kuttner Baruch, the latter two, also co-founders of the B'nai B'rith, the Jewish offshoot of Freemasonry, of British Freemasonry, and a key agent under Lord Palmerston, who actually set up the Civil War. That was his baby. In the explicitly satanic Scottish rite of Freemasonry with Mazzini, Giuseppe Mazzini, the founder of the Mafia. He was a right-hand man of Palmerston. And such leaders of the 1848 revolutions in Europe as Louis Blanc, Garibaldi, and Kossuth. Through this act, the story of Jones's life came full circle. It was the Northwest branch of this conspiracy that created the KKK in Indiana, a center for both the immediate predecessor of the Klan, the Knights of the Golden Circle, and of the Klan's 1920s revival by two agents of the Red Cross Knights of Malta, of which Jones's father was a member. It was, the Knights of Malta is an immensely powerful order that it's a sovereign entity, has its own license plates, its own passport, I think, and to be a top member of the Knights of Malta, you have to come from a powerful aristocratic family with a background of, I think, about 300 or 400 years. And it is my sense that the Knights of Malta are stage managing violent conflict all over the world from behind the scenes. Just a thought. It was Jones's position at the center of San Francisco's growing pool of drugs and ghetto zombies manufactured by MKUltra that attracted local mayoral candidate George Moscone, California Governor Jerry Brown, and vice presidential candidate Walter Mondale to Reverend Jones. He was billed as a man who could deliver 2,000 bodies on a moment's notice to any political rally and mobilize the over 20,000 people by then affiliated with the temple to vote for any candidate of his choosing. So now we have a very different, far more pervasive cult where people actually somehow they have it rationalized that illegal aliens should be able to vote. Following Walter Mondale's infamous advice to vote early and vote often, to cheat, this dirty, nasty Saul Alinsky strategy, Jones's goon squads were made available to the Democratic Party for its 1976 Operation Big Vote Fraud. Wow, listen to this. Read this over. Look at what happened in 2020. That was credited, among other things, with swinging the election for Moscone. When pressure mounted for a full investigation, People's Temple attorney Tim Stone was brought in to cover up the crime from his new position as assistant district attorney for the county. Jones personally was awarded a seat on the San Francisco Housing Authority. It was all, this is really incredible. But I get excited when I read it because, as I've said over and over again, what we're seeing here are the precursors to what we have on a much larger scale that is all-pervading, really. But here you have all the ingredients being sprinkled into the cauldron of industrial scale mental or psychological manipulation going on. It was also shortly after the temple's move into San Francisco that Jones began to contact the Guyanese government to explore opening a settlement there. Armed with letters of introduction from Mondale, Brown, Moscone, and other Democratic Party officials, Jones's People's Temple was considered an ideal candidate for a new black immigration program established by the Guyanese government called Operation MIREV. After 20 temple members visited the country in 1973, arrangements were made for the lease of 27,000 acres for the founding of Jonestown, near Guyana's border with Venezuela. In 1977, the first major steps were taken to trigger Jones's paranoid schizophrenic personality when Tim Stone dropped out to form the Concerned Parents Group, taking Jones to court for control of a child whose paternity was in question. According to Charles Gary, a former attorney for Angela Davis, the CPUSA leader closely associated with H. Bruce Franklin and Huxley associate Herbert Marcuse, Jones threatened to have 300 cult members commit suicide on the spot if Stone pursued his lawsuit. Also in 1977, British publisher Rupert Murdoch printed a major piece on the People's Temple in his New West magazine, designed to further trigger Jones's paranoia. It was this piece which launched Congressman Ryan's fatal investigation into conditions at Jonestown. So, There's some notes. Maybe I'll stop here. And there's so much more in this cultism's roots in MK Ultra. I think that's what we'll get into next. We've got the British priesthood involved, background, the drugs, the formula that empire has used for centuries to create synthetic cults which are internalized by the people as organic and which require them often to kill and die for completely fictitious and superstitious narratives that have nothing to do with reality, except that they serve the interests of the oligarchy, who are themselves completely cynical.